During the 2024 U.S. presidential election, Donald Trump referred to tariffs as the most beautiful word in the dictionary, and he proposed raising tariffs to 60% on imports from China and 102% on imports from other trade partners. However, critics argue that this policy, which Trump claims would protect American jobs and industries, has significant drawbacks. A new analysis by Nikkei Asia, based on research by the Institute of Developing Economies, (IDE), under the Japan External Trade Organization, JETRO, suggests that Trump's proposed tariff increases could have a damaging impact on the U.S. economy. The analysis estimates that U.S. gross domestic product, GDP, could be 1.1% lower by 2027 as a result of higher tariffs, primarily due to increased prices on goods and the potential loss of jobs. The most affected sectors could include mining and agriculture, which may see declines in output of up to 1.5%. Trump's tariff proposals, including a 25% tariff on imports from Mexico and Canada, as well as a 10% increase on Chinese imports, would likely lead to higher prices for consumers, reducing their purchasing power. In particular, the agriculture sector, which relies heavily on imports from neighboring countries, would face significant price hikes on essential goods like fresh produce. The U.S. could also see fewer job opportunities in industries hurt by the increased costs of these imports. According to IDE's Yumo ISO, these protectionist measures may not only harm the U.S. economy but also limit global economic growth. For example, many of the U.S.'s imports from China, such as natural graphite and permanent magnets, are critical for electric vehicle (EV) production. China is responsible for over 3/4 of the U.S. supply of these materials, and a sharp increase in tariffs could raise the prices of EVs and hinder the U.S.'s transition to cleaner energy. In addition, China supplies a majority of the lithium-ion batteries used in electric vehicles. Thus, the tariff policies could disrupt the entire EV supply chain, leading to higher costs for U.S. consumers and manufacturers alike. On the other hand, the tariffs may lead to economic growth in other regions, as countries in Asia, including Japan and India, stand to benefit from industries relocating away from China. For instance, Japan could see a modest 0.2% growth in GDP over the next 4 years, driven by increased automobile exports to the U.S. as companies in China shift production to countries like Vietnam and Cambodia. The U.S. trade deficit with these countries could widen, benefiting their economies but also potentially creating new supply chain risks. While some U.S. allies like Mexico and Canada may suffer from Trump's tariff policies, these countries are already preparing for the potential impact. Mexico, for instance, could see a 3.8% reduction in its GDP by 2027, with the automotive sector being hit particularly hard. Canada's GDP could shrink by 1.2% during the same period, as the country's automotive industry is similarly vulnerable. Several Japanese manufacturers are reconsidering their investments in Mexico due to the potential tariffs, and companies like Sumitomo Electric Industries are closely monitoring the situation before proceeding with new projects. China, too, has prepared for the possibility of a renewed trade war with the U.S. and has already begun retaliatory actions, especially after the Biden administration's recent restrictions on China's access to AI chip components. In response, Beijing has threatened to limit exports of raw materials and key technologies, including rare earth metals and drone components. These retaliatory measures are designed not only to challenge U.S. companies but also to limit potential U.S. leverage over China's economy. China's strategic approach to these retaliations has been more measured compared to the first trade war, opting for symbolic moves rather than large-scale economic warfare. Chinese companies, meanwhile, are moving away from reliance on U.S. suppliers, having learned from the earlier trade conflict. For instance, the Chinese government has ramped up its domestic chip production and sought to create new export controls on high-tech materials. Some Chinese experts, including former People's Bank of China Governor Yi Gang, argue that retaliatory actions are typically not ideal but are often unavoidable in the face of U.S. aggression. Despite these preparations, China's actions remain calibrated to avoid direct harm to the broader economy, suggesting a preference for strategic countermeasures over full-scale economic conflict. The second U.S.-China trade war may also have broader consequences for global markets, with countries like Canada and those in the Southern Hemisphere potentially benefiting as industries shift away from China. However, the the long-term impacts of these shifts on global trade and supply chains remain uncertain. In addition to trade measures, Canada, too, has threatened retaliatory actions. Some Canadian officials have warned that they might cut off energy exports to the US if Trump moves forward with his proposed tariffs on Canadian goods. Ontario Premier Doug Ford even suggested that Canada could use its energy exports, such as hydroelectric power, as leverage in the event of US tariffs. While the US heavily imports energy from Canada, especially electricity, analysts believe such retaliatory measures would be a double-edged sword. Both economies are so intertwined that halting energy exports could lead to significant disruptions in both nations. However, due to Canada's reliance on the US as a key market for oil, it seems unlikely that Canada would take such drastic steps. Despite the potential for tariffs to harm the Canadian economy, experts argue that the US would also feel the impact of disruptions to supply chains for goods like oil and aluminum. Though Canada is a crucial supplier of oil to the US, particularly in regions that rely on Canadian imports, any attempt to cut off this supply would likely hurt both countries' economies. Still, analysts suggest that Canada may instead focus on other areas for retaliation, such as restricting exports of critical metals like aluminum and nickel, which are difficult for the US to source from other suppliers. In conclusion, while Trump's proposed tariff policies may initially appear to benefit the US economy by protecting American industries, the broader economic implications are far more complex. The policies could reduce US GDP, raise costs for consumers, and cause significant disruption to global supply chains. US trade partners, including China, Canada, and Mexico, are already preparing for the economic fallout, and many countries in Asia may see an uptick in exports as industries relocate away from China. Ultimately, while Trump's tariff policies are aimed at restoring American dominance in global trade, the consequences of such measures may have unintended global repercussions, hurting US consumers, workers, and industries in ways that are difficult to predict.